It is the early hours of November 13th, 1974. A quiet street in Long Island lies under a blanket of silence. The houses are dark, the river nearby reflects the faint glow of streetlights, and everything seems perfectly ordinary. Yet inside one home, something extraordinary and unsettling is unfolding. 6 members of the DeFeo family will never wake again. The most haunting detail is not only the tragedy itself, but the silence that surrounded it. No neighbors reported cries for help. No sounds of struggle echoed through the night. It was as if the house itself swallowed every noise, leaving only stillness. When police entered, they expected to find an intruder hiding in the shadows. Instead, they discovered that the person responsible was already waiting calmly at a local bar, almost as if he knew the inevitable end of the story. His name was Ronald DeFeo Jr. From that moment, the address at 112 Ocean Avenue became more than just a crime scene. It became a symbol of fear, mystery, and speculation. Books and films would later turn the house into a legend, but behind the ghost stories lies a chilling reality. A family torn apart, a young man whose mind seemed fractured, and questions that investigators could never fully answer. One lesser-known fact that continues to puzzle experts is how none of the victims appeared to move from their beds. Some theories suggest they may have been sedated, while others whisper about forces beyond explanation. But no definitive answer has ever been found, leaving the case suspended between fact and folklore. Imagine the sensory details: the cold air of the November night, the eerie silence of the neighborhood, the unsettling stillness inside the house. Even seasoned investigators admitted they would never forget the atmosphere of that scene. And so the story of Amityville is not just about what happened, it is about what remains unanswered. Was this simply the tragic unraveling of a troubled mind? Or did something darker linger within those walls? That uncertainty is what keeps the legend alive. If you are drawn to real stories that blur the line between reality and nightmare, stay with us. Because sometimes the most terrifying tales are not born from imagination, but from the silence of a house where questions will never be fully resolved. To the neighbors of Amityville, the DeFeo family seemed to be living the American dream. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue was large, elegant, and sat in a quiet neighborhood surrounded by manicured lawns and boats bobbing gently along the nearby river. Ronald DeFeo Sr. worked hard and maintained the rigid image of a successful man. His wife, Louise DeFeo, cared for their 5 children. Among them was Ronald DeFeo Jr., known to everyone as Butch. But behind that perfect facade, there existed a daily routine marked by fear, tension, and something much darker. Close friends would later reveal that Ronald Sr. was extremely aggressive behind closed doors. Violent arguments erupted regularly, and Butch grew up in an environment where threats and explosive rage were simply part of everyday life. The walls of that beautiful house held secrets that no passerby could have imagined. As the years passed, Ronald Jr. began to change dramatically. He became involved with substances that altered his mind and behavior. His actions grew increasingly unpredictable, and those around him noticed clear signs of emotional instability. In certain moments, he seemed completely disconnected from reality. And then something even more disturbing began to happen. People close to Butch started hearing him talk about voices that no one else could hear, voices that left him irritated, paranoid, and deeply frightened. He would describe them in fragments, never fully explaining what they said or where they came from. Some dismissed it as the effects of his substance use. Others grew quietly concerned, but no one, not even those closest to him, could have imagined how far this would go. Because inside that house on Ocean Avenue, violence was building toward a level that seemed unimaginable. The tension that had simmered for years was reaching a breaking point. And what would unfold in the early morning darkness of November 13th, 1974, would shock even the most experienced investigators in the region. The case that would emerge from 112 Ocean Avenue would become one of the most infamous incidents in American history, spawning countless investigations, theories, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. But before that night, there was a family that from the outside looked absolutely perfect. Shortly after 3 in the morning, While the city of Amityville slept in absolute silence, Ronald DeFeo Jr. walked through the corridors of his own home, carrying a Marlin rifle, caliber .35. One by one, the members of his family lay sleeping in their room, and without any hesitation, he moved through the house with methodical precision. First his parents, then his siblings, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and John Matthew, all found lifeless in their own beds, all while they slept. But here's what made investigators stop in their tracks. Not one of the victims appeared to have tried to escape. Not a single neighbor reported hearing screams. No evidence of struggle was found anywhere in the house. Nothing, just silence, as if the entire home had been swallowed by some invisible force in those dark early hours. Even the family dog, which normally barked at any unusual sound, remained completely quiet throughout the incident. Hours later, Ronald Jr. appeared at a local bar, desperate and frantic, shouting that his family had been attacked. He was crying, trembling, and insisted that someone had broken into his home. Witnesses would later describe his performance as convincing, almost theatrical in its desperation. Police rushed to the scene and discovered something so disturbing that many officers would later say they could never forget the smell, the silence, and the sight of those 6 bodies arranged in their beds. Each victim had been found lying face down in an eerily similar position, a detail that would haunt investigators for decades. Initially, Ronald Jr. attempted to maintain a story that an intruder, possibly connected to organized crime, had committed the act. He wove elaborate tales of mob connections and mysterious enemies his father had supposedly made in business. But investigators began noticing contradictions almost immediately. Small details in his statements shifted constantly. His timeline didn't align with physical evidence. His emotional reactions seemed practiced, rehearsed. And then, during an intense interrogation session that stretched through the night, something inside him finally broke. What he said next would leave everyone in the room stunned. "Once I started," he confessed in a voice barely above a whisper, "I just couldn't stop." But that confession was far from closing the case. In fact, it was merely the beginning of the most disturbing part of this entire story. Because the question that would haunt investigators, psychologists, and everyone who studied this case wasn't just about what happened that night. It was about why no one woke up, why no one ran, why the silence was so complete, and the answers that would emerge would be far stranger than anyone could have anticipated. After his confession, Ronald DeFeo Jr. presented an explanation that would plunge this case into dark and controversial territory. According to him, voices inside the house commanded him to harm his entire family. In some moments, he claimed that malevolent forces controlled his mind completely. In others, he insisted that his sister Dawn had actually participated in the events, that she had helped him before he turned on her. His versions of what happened shifted constantly, creating a labyrinth of lies, manipulations, and doubts that investigators struggled to navigate. Psychiatrists were brought in to determine whether Ronald suffered from severe mental disorders or whether he was simply attempting to escape a life sentence. The evaluations revealed a complex picture. He showed signs of antisocial personality disorder, but was he truly experiencing psychosis, or was this an elaborate performance? Meanwhile, investigators faced questions that kept them awake at night. How did no one wake up during the incident? Why were all 6 bodies found face down in their beds in nearly identical positions? How did not a single victim attempt to run or even call out for help? The rifle he used was incredibly loud, each shot echoing through the house. Yet the silence remained unexplained. Some theories suggested that the family members might have been sedated before the incident occurred. Toxicology reports were examined and re-examined. Others raised the possibility of more than one person being involved, which would explain Ronald Jr.'s inconsistent statements about Dawn's participation. But none of these hypotheses could be completely proven with the evidence available. Here's a detail most people don't know. Investigators found gunpowder residue on Dawn's nightgown, which fueled speculation that she may have fired a weapon that night. However, this evidence was contested and never definitively explained. The trial transformed Ronald Jr. into a nationally known figure. Media outlets exploited every detail of the case. Newspapers published frightening headlines daily, and the public became obsessed with understanding what had happened inside 112 Ocean Avenue. Courtroom artists sketched his blank expressions. Reporters dissected his every word. And while the court convicted him of 6 counts of second-degree offense, sentencing him to 25 years to life on each count, something even stranger began to grow around that house. A narrative that would transform this criminal case into one of the most famous supernatural stories of the century, because just 1 year after the incident, a new family would step into that residence with hope and excitement about their new home. They purchased it at a dramatically reduced price, fully aware of its dark history, but believing they could move past it. What they would claim to experience over the next 28 days would blur the line between documented tragedy and unexplained phenomena. Their story would spawn books, films, and endless debate about what really happens in places touched by unspeakable events. The DeFeo case was about to take on a second life, one that would reach far beyond courtrooms and crime scenes into the realm of legend. Police quickly concluded that Ronald acted alone that November night. The evidence was overwhelming and pointed in only one direction. Ballistic analysis confirmed that all shots came from the same Marlin rifle found in his possession. His own confession, despite its shifting details, placed him at the scene, and the contradictions in his statements, rather than suggesting accomplice involvement, simply revealed a mind scrambling to construct a believable alternative reality. The prosecution built a case that seemed airtight, methodical, impossible to refute. During the trial, which captivated the nation throughout 1975, the defense presented an insanity plea. They argued that Ronald heard voices commanding him, that he existed in a state of psychosis so severe he couldn't fully comprehend his actions. Expert witnesses described possible schizophrenia, dissociative episodes, a complete break from reality. The courtroom became a battleground of psychiatric testimony. However, psychiatrists working for the prosecution presented a starkly different picture. They argued that Ronald knew exactly what he was doing, that he had planned the incident, moved methodically through the house, and then attempted to construct an alibi by appearing at the bar in a state of false panic. His tears, they suggested, were performance. His confusion, a carefully crafted act. Here's a detail that often gets overlooked. Ronald DeFeo Jr. had actually collected insurance money on a stolen speedboat just weeks before the incident, demonstrating his capacity for premeditated deception and his comfort with manipulating systems for personal gain. In 1975, after weeks of testimony that laid bare every horrifying detail of that November night, the jury reached their verdict. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was convicted on 6 counts of second-degree offense and sentenced to 6 consecutive 25 years to life prison terms, totaling 150 years behind bars. The judge's voice was steady as he delivered the sentence, but those present in the courtroom would later describe an atmosphere thick with tension, grief, and something darker, an acknowledgement that justice, while served, could never truly restore what had been lost. Over the years that followed, Ronald attempted to alter his version of events numerous times. In different appeals and interviews, he accused his sister Dawn of being involved, claiming she had helped before he turned on her. He alleged conspiracies involving organized crime figures his father supposedly knew. He presented new theories involving mysterious intruders and elaborate cover-ups. None of these attempts convinced the authorities. Each new story only further demonstrated his willingness to manipulate facts and distort reality to serve his own purposes. Parole was denied repeatedly year after year as he continued to show no genuine remorse or consistent accountability. The justice system considered the case closed, a tragic but resolved chapter in criminal history. But outside the courtroom walls, beyond the legal proceedings and psychiatric evaluations, the story was nowhere near finished. Because the house on Ocean Avenue was about to become known worldwide for a reason even more unsettling than the documented tragedy that had occurred within its walls, a new narrative was emerging, one that would transform a criminal case into a cultural phenomenon that blurs the line between reality and something far more mysterious. And what happened next would ensure that the name Amityville would echo through generations, spoken in whispers and debated endlessly, long after the courtroom doors had closed. In December of 1975, just 13 months after the tragic incident, George and Kathy Lutz moved into the house on Ocean Avenue with their 3 children. The property was incredibly affordable for its size and location, a sprawling Dutch colonial with a boathouse and waterfront views. The reason for the bargain price? The events that had occurred there barely a year before. Even knowing the dark history, they decided to move forward. They saw it as an opportunity, a fresh start in a beautiful home. They had the house blessed by a priest before moving in, hoping to cleanse whatever darkness might linger within those walls. But according to the couple, strange occurrences began almost immediately. Doors would slam shut on their own with tremendous force, hard enough to rattle the frames. Horrible smells would appear from nowhere, a suffocating stench of decay that seemed to have no source. Cold spots would manifest inside bedrooms, areas where the temperature would drop so dramatically you could see your breath, even though the heating system was running perfectly. George claimed he would wake up at exactly 3:15 in the morning, night after night, unable to fall back asleep. The approximate time of the incident. It became an obsession, watching the clock approach that dreaded hour, feeling something pulling him from sleep at that precise moment. Kathy reported hearing voices whispering in empty rooms and footsteps echoing through the hallways during the early morning hours. The children spoke of seeing frightening figures moving through the house, including a pig-like creature with glowing red eyes that would appear at their windows. As the days passed, George's behavior began to change drastically. Friends and family noticed he was becoming aggressive, paranoid, and strangely obsessed with chopping firewood and keeping warm, even when the temperature was perfectly comfortable. His appearance shifted too. He stopped shaving, grew pale, and seemed to age years in just weeks. Here's something most people don't know. George Lutz bore a striking physical resemblance to Ronald DeFeo Jr., and during their time in the house, that resemblance seemed to grow even stronger, as if he were somehow becoming the man who had been taken from his family in that very home. Just 28 days after moving in, the family fled the residence in the middle of the night, leaving behind furniture, clothing, and personal belongings. They never returned, not even to collect their possessions. Shortly after their escape, their story captured the entire nation. The book, The Amityville Horror, became a worldwide phenomenon, selling millions of copies and inspiring dozens of films that continue to be made even today. Millions of people came to believe that the house was cursed, that something evil had taken root there, and refused to leave. Paranormal investigators descended on Ocean Avenue. Ed and Lorraine Warren, famous demonologists, conducted their own investigation and claimed to have documented genuine supernatural activity. Photographs were taken showing mysterious figures. Audio recordings captured unexplained sound. And the more fame the story gained, the more controversies emerged. Many accused the Lutz family of fabricating everything for financial gain. After all, they profited considerably from book deals and movie rights. Inconsistencies in their story were pointed out by skeptics. The lawyer who represented them at the closing of the house later claimed that he, George, and author Jay Anson had created the haunting story over bottles of wine. Others believed sincerely that something malevolent existed in that house, that the violence committed there had opened a doorway to something dark and unexplainable. Subsequent owners of the house reported no unusual activity whatsoever. They lived there peacefully for years, dismissing the entire haunting as fiction. The address was eventually changed to discourage curious visitors, but the legend persisted. But regardless of the truth, the name Amityville had already become eternal. And to this day, decades later, no one can completely separate the real criminal case from the terrifying legend that was born in its wake. The house on Ocean Avenue stands as a monument to both documented tragedy and possible supernatural folklore, a place where fact and fiction have become so intertwined that untangling them may be impossible. If you've made it this far, drop a comment below. Do you believe something supernatural existed in that house, or was it all an elaborate story crafted for profit and fame? The Amityville incident left scars that cut across generations, wounds that time has failed to fully heal. 6 lives were extinguished inside a house that, to this day, remains surrounded by questions without definitive answers. The beautiful Dutch colonial on Ocean Avenue, once a symbol of the American dream, became a monument to tragedy and the subject of endless speculation. Ronald DeFeo Jr. spent the remainder of his life behind bars, passing away in prison in March of 2021 at the age of 69. He carried with him contradictory versions of that November night, disturbing statements that shifted with each telling, and mysteries that may never be completely solved. Throughout his decades of incarceration, he gave interviews that only deepened the enigma. Sometimes he claimed demonic possession, other times he blamed his sister. In some accounts, he expressed what seemed like genuine confusion about his own memories, as if that night existed behind a fog he could never fully penetrate. But what truly transformed this case into something so enduringly frightening was the way reality and supernatural terror began to blend together in the public consciousness. Because while the facts point clearly to a violent incident committed by an unstable man struggling with substance abuse and possible mental illness, the stories about that house made millions of people believe that something far darker was hidden within those walls. The Lutz family's account, whether true or fabricated, gave the tragedy a second life, one that reached far beyond courtrooms and evidence rooms. Here's something most people don't realize. The house on Ocean Avenue has been sold multiple times since the incident, and several families have lived there peacefully for years without reporting anything unusual. They describe it simply as a home, a place where children grow up and ordinary life unfolds. Yet the legend persists, stronger than any testimony from actual residents, and perhaps that's exactly what makes Amityville so unsettling even today. Not just the documented crime, but the feeling that some questions will never have clear answers. The uncertainty that lingers in the spaces between fact and folklore. The way a single night of violence created ripples that continue to spread outward, touching new generations who weren't even born when it happened. Maybe the true horror doesn't lie in ghosts or demons at all. Maybe it rests in the human capacity for violence within the supposed safety of home, the destruction of family bonds in a place that should represent love and protection. Maybe it's found in the silence of that night, the inexplicable fact that no one woke, no one ran, no one called for help. Or perhaps the real terror is simpler, that while the world sleeps in silence, trusting in the safety of locked doors and familiar walls, darkness can emerge from the most unexpected places, from within rather than without. The house still stands on Ocean Avenue, its address changed to discourage the curious, its windows reflecting the same sunlight that shone on it decades ago. New families have made memories there, celebrated birthdays, shared meals, lived ordinary lives. And yet the name Amityville carries weight that no amount of normalcy can fully erase. If you're drawn to true stories that continue to haunt us decades after they occurred, stories that reveal uncomfortable truths about human nature and the mysteries we may never fully understand, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who appreciates the real cases that blur the line between documented fact and enduring legend. Because here, each investigation reveals a side of reality more disturbing than any horror film has ever managed to capture. The truth, as they say, is often stranger and more unsettling than fiction. And in the case of Amityville, the truth and the legend have become so intertwined that separating them may be impossible. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Some stories are meant to be told and retold, each generation finding new meaning in the darkness. Amityville is both.